Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon, episode 38. General Robert Craufurd, also known as Black Bob Craufurd, of the British Army. We have a special guest for this episode on Black Bob Craufurd. Our good friend Marcus Cribb is joining us for the third time.
Thank you very much. I always love your intros. You've got a great way of being to this, but thank you very much for having me back for the third one.
No, my pleasure. And interesting character, this Black Bob Craufurd. I was talking to you earlier. I was reading some articles on him, and you really couldn't make this guy up in a dime store novel. He was just incredible.
He's really different to the ones we've covered so far, and I'd say probably a bit more on the controversial scale here as well. Mm-hmm. He's got some things to like and some things to loathe.
All right. Well, before we jump into them, let's talk about a few things. I'll talk about the first one, which I think is really intriguing. June 18th of this year, if you've never been to the Waterloo battlefield in Belgium there's a tour of the battlefield that Marcus is doing for free. And you can learn all about it on eventbrite.com if you want to join Marcus for that tour, which I think would be really neat. The second one is even more incredible, if you want to touch on that one, Marcus.
Thank you. Yes. So as well as going to Waterloo and pottering around with me, just to be there on the anniversary, in September this year, myself and Dan Hill, who's an excellent military historian and a battlefield guide, we're taking a group over to Portugal and Spain and doing some of the highlights of especially the early Peninsular War. So starting in Lisbon, doing Roliça, Vimeiro, Porto, which kind of, I joke say is my battle. So I'll give you a walking tour of how they crossed the Douro, off to Picasso, Ciudad Rodrigo. We'll do Badajoz and a few other places in between, including the cemetery at Elvas. So be a really good 2 nights in each place. So we're not on the road too much. You know, there's a chance there to unpack and have a drink and relax and have a chat to like-minded people in the evenings as well.
Yeah, and you're not just visiting battlefields, you can see the cities as well. So
we're going to see the cities. I mean, yeah, you start and finish in Lisbon, which is just, as a tourist, it's just a beautiful, beautiful capital city. We've got really good interest. You know, we're definitely doing it, and really looking forward to that one and to being back out there on the Coa River, on the Douro River, and those kind of scenic areas are just beautiful, beautiful to see.
Yeah,
history aside,
yeah, no, for sure. No, I'm very interested in that one. If you need more information, I think you can go to dukeofwellington.org for that one.
Thank you. Yes, I always put everything on my little sites. That's all on there, both in June and September, both the tours on dukeofwellington.org.
All right, and one more shout out, of course, for our Napoleonic and Revolutionary War Graves charity that you and I are both a member of. I'd like people to check that out as well.
Please do support us, become a member, and we wouldn't say no to a donation or two, if I'm going to be brutally honest. We're a charity, and we've already started now on multiple grave restorations and have some really interesting projects in the pipeline. But we started with a chap who was at Trafalgar, and we've recently restored some graves of French prisoners of war in England. And we've got some international ones that we want to do as well. So this is not just a British, and it's not just, the Brits doing the Brits. We're an international charity, and we're looking at international people involved, and there is no limit to that.
I love that one. All right, well, let's jump into our subject matter here. Robert Craufurd was born in May 1764 in Newark Castle, and I'll let you handle the pronunciation of the city in England.
In Ayrshire.
Thank you. And he was the third son of Sir Alexander Craufurd, who was a baronet in the British aristocracy. Can you tell us a bit about his upbringing?
Yeah, so Ayrshire, so we're north of the border now, so we're into Scotland. Obviously, at the time, actually, they did call it England in the contemporary period, which is slightly confusing and a bit controversial today. But we're north of the border. We're into Scottish baronetcy. So we've got a knight, effectively. It's the lowest level of the aristocracy there. And that's where he grew up, relatively rural. He is coming again from the aristocratic stock that we see with a lot of generals within the British military at the time. It's quite typical. And he's one of a few brothers.
Yeah, and as we mentioned earlier, because he is the third son and not the first son, he's going to have to work for what he gets, correct?
He is. So they often say that the first one's going to kind of run the farm, run the estate, bring up the house, and they've got that sorted. The second and third ones really are kind of destined for the military or politics to bring up their own. And the joke used to be that if they ended up with a fourth or fifth, one of them would go for the clergy to pray for the souls of the other ones, so they can to do what they needed to.
I've never heard that. That's great.
It's a bit of an old joke from the time, but you'll see that often these larger families, if they've got 5 or 6 sons, that one of them would join the clergy, and because it's a respectable career.
Sure.
But young Robert Bob Craufurd has kind of his eyes on the military.
And I assume he receives good education. He's aristocracy, so I imagine he does he at least gets a sound education growing up.
He does. He's going to school both in Scotland and then down on the kind of further south into England for his kind of formal education, which is quite short. Because at the time, I know we've mentioned it before, but it's worth stressing, this is normal. He's purchased his way into the army. So that's how it works. There's a whole belief that you are supporting the kind of the institution of the British politics and the military, and you buy your way in. It's more expensive to join the guards or the cavalry, for example. The odd ones out are the engineers and the artillery. You're trained to go in at that point.
Yeah. It looks like he joins the military at 15 and enlists in the 25th Foot.
Yeah, 15 is very, very young. So the regiment become the King's Own Scottish Borderers, but the 25th Regiment of Foot at 15 years old. So he's young. He's not going to be one of the youngest, but he's certainly going to be, he's a boy. He's 15 years old.
Yeah,
joining as an ensign.
But the intriguing thing, by 19, he's a company commander. But again, you and I talked about this. Did he get promoted on his ability or his aristocratic background?
As far as I'm aware here, it's really going to be down to him purchasing his way up. So it's his money and his status there that's going up. So a company at the time is going to have a captain commanding it. And then depending on the unit, you'll have 2 to 4, usually 2 subalterns, so lieutenants or ensigns there to help command the day-to-day running of the unit as a sub-unit. So the company commander actually has a lot more autonomy. There's not really a status above that before the battalion commander. So by 19, he's a captain and is got on paper 100 men under his command.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. A company roughly is about 100 soldiers, and he was well educated. He spoke German. It seems like he was a bright guy. I don't know if he was Black Bob just yet, though. He was probably too young for that.
Yeah, and he certainly hasn't got the nickname. Yeah, he spent some time in Berlin and picks up some German from that. But the nickname doesn't come in until at least mostly I've got the Peninsula. Where it really kind of comes up as his reputation. So at this point, it's quite a typical upbringing for a Scottish aristocrat, really.
Okay. So by 1787, he's a captain in the 75th Regiment, and he doesn't see his first action in Europe. Where does he get his first, baptism of fire? Yeah, so we're at the heights of the British Empire here. So he's with Lord Cornwallis, and he's in India. They have a campaign over there. He's not actually in India for that long compared to some others. He's actually back in the UK, in Ireland by 1798, but he's with the famous Cornwallis over there, and kind of expanding the British Empire and the colonialism of the time. Right. And from there, though, you mentioned he wasn't there that long. In 1798, he's helping to suppress a rebellion in Ireland under General Lake. So it seems like he's getting a very worldly military education at this point. Yeah,
he comes back. He has some time, I believe, in Austria for a short amount of time, and he does some studying with, especially at the time we had the Prussian system, and the Germans are thought of as being kind of the way to go for studying military. And he comes back via there to Ireland with General Lake, putting down, I think, the 1798 rebellion, which is Wolfe Tone's rebellion. He was a very famous national leader of the Irish cause, who was eventually captured at the end of that kind of rebellion uprising, with the famously kind of getting battles involving British against Irish troops and Irish troops who have been part of the British militia and yeomanry at the time. There's some engravings of them fighting on both sides, and he was part of that. This is very dark times for Irish history, and it's split down cousin to cousin, different lines there, with the British military playing a very important part on suppressing that, really. And that's what he had to do, and does it very well. He's there with General Lake, and he's leading troops and is on the staff as well. So I think he's mostly General Lake's staff officer, showing his abilities then to work at a higher level above his rank, which is quite important for his later works.
Yeah, and you mentioned his experience in learning from the Prussians and different militaries. It seems like, kind of like Napoleon and Wellington, he hated inefficiency, or when the army wasn't working at its fullest capacity. It seemed to really bother him. Yeah,
and I think this is probably the early parts of his temper that kind of comes in. He's somebody there that has a famous rage, and this starts to come out at this kind of stage. You don't really want to show it when you're a junior ensign or lieutenant, that you're so easily bothered and rageful, but when you start to work your way up as a staff officer, I think he gets to Deputy Assistant Adjutant General, one of those kind of longer titles. He can actually show his frustration, because he's at a position now that's kind of quite higher up, and he's got a way to kind of influence people.
Yeah, and I remember Napoleon pulled aside both Marshal Lannes and Marshal Ney and said, "Hey, you can't be a great leader of men if you have this horrible temper." And I remember Lannes really working on it, and Ney not so much. But I think that that is an important piece. Like, you can't just fly off the handle whenever something goes bad for you.
No, and Ney's kind of one of those ones that's more famous for it. Brave to the brave, but really fiery temper. And I think Craufurd's probably up there as a kind of a contemporary comparison for Ney, with leading different units and also having that subunit command and having certainly the temper that he's got. But he's also, he's very skilled, and his language really has got him that some basic training outside of the British military, and puts him a really strange one to Switzerland as well.
Yeah.
Just after Ireland, he ends up with, I think, like a Russian expedition into Switzerland, and then follows them into the Netherlands, with the Russians and the Duke of York invading the Netherlands Low Country, which is where we get the nursery rhyme, the Grand Old Duke of York. He had 10,000 men. Yeah, he's on that, where they're kind of marching around the Low Countries as a staff officer. So he's getting quite a lot of experience at quite an early stage. We've got India, Ireland, Switzerland, and the Netherlands already.
And on the lighter side, in 1800, he gets married to Mary Frances. Can you tell us a bit about their marriage? It seems like a pretty happy one.
They seem to have one of these kind of rare things of a happy marriage at this time.
Yeah.
They seem to be quite well suited. There's not much about Mary Frances, but I found she was the granddaughter of Capability Brown, Lancelot Brown, who's a really famous landscape designer in England at the time. He does all of these massive parks and landscapes outside of country houses, such like Chatsworth House, famous for Pride and Prejudice, and the Duke of Devonshire. And he was kind of mid to early 1700s, and he kind of came along and just did huge landscape projects, digging lakes and rebuilding artificial hills, mostly for the wealthiest aristocracy,
of course.
And when you go to these beautiful places like Chatsworth, Blenheim, you see the Capability Brown. His real name was Lancelot. One of these few names, Lancelot Brown, that I think actually his first name's possibly better than his nickname,
right?
Because it's Lancelot.
Yeah.
But she's the granddaughter of him.
Yeah,
and so they've got some money from there, but they seem to get on quite well, and they do later have a son who I believe is born in Lisbon.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they had a couple kids, and I find it interesting that he regularly requested Frollo to see her, and sometimes he didn't even tell Wellington he was going to go see her. He would just take off.
It's not an ideal situation, but it's quite endearing.
Yeah.
But actually, he seems to care about his wife. The other one that really seems to come out as a love story is General Graham, Thomas Graham, who kind of fights his own personal war against the French revolutionaries because of his love of his wife.
Yes.
Story for another time. Maybe.
Yeah, no, that is a great story. Absolutely. So getting back to our protagonist, in 1805, Craufurd's promoted to full colonel. and take part in the ill-fated expedition of Buenos Aires. Can you, and I hate to go down rabbit holes, but this is, I think it's an important part of his story. Can you give us an overview of, kind of a quick overview of what happened there?
I will do my best, of course. So he goes to full colonel. So you are saying earlier, you promote your way up to lieutenant colonel with one rank below. Yep. And to put it into context for American friends and listeners, this is full bird colonel.
That's right.
And from this point onwards, you can only move up by ability, really.
Yep. Yep.
And we've decided to take the war to Spain. So if we park what we know later about the Peninsular War and Spain being our allies, this is the difficult in-between bit just after Trafalgar.
Right.
And you can see why it makes it so difficult in the Peninsular War when Spain are our allies just 1 or 2 years later.
Yeah.
Because we're deciding to take the fight to the Spanish by going into South America. So it's often known as the River Plate expedition. It's got a couple of different names. And this is where they are going in.
Argentina and Chile.
Argentina and Chile in modern day, Buenos Aires, Argentina, Uruguay. And it's kind of basically the Spanish colonies over there. And we're going in to cause a lot of trouble, really. The eyes are on Buenos Aires. And I think the ultimate aim was to force a capitulation of South America, which was actually where Wellesley later was being eyed up for another one, but they don't go very well. We end up with Beresford, one of Wellington's right-hand men, having to surrender, supported, hugely by Royal Navy under Homeriggs Popham, and they're going in. And there's certainly lots of fighting, lots of incidents along the coast between Montevideo and Buenos Aires and going in. But the British just do not pull this one out of the bag and ended up kind of cap in hand having to surrender.
Yeah.
And organising a way to get back.
Yeah, it seems Craufurd performed well, but he accused his commander-in-chief of cowardice and being a traitor. So it just sounds like, the Spanish army there was fighting well. They had, just some good generals on their side, but on the British side, it sounds like Craufurd wasn't too pleased with his commander-in-chief. No,
and it really when you read the list that you say these generals, you've got Dennis Pack, who later on is in the Peninsula, famously at Waterloo, and Beresford himself, who's a really good administrator, and we'll talk about him another time, certainly in relation to the Peninsula War. But it doesn't come out. The Spanish, I think we're expecting a bit of like local uprising.
Right.
And that doesn't take place. The Spanish have got the area like kind of locked down, and we end up with street fighting, rooftop to rooftops. There's famously an incident that involves Thomas Plunkett, who's a 95th Rifleman, who will feature later, and who's shooting Spanish officers down the street.
Yep.
So there's some quite brutal fighting, but the numbers on the Spanish side soon, effectively is their like local area. I'm not going to say home turf because they have invaded there and knocked it down centuries earlier, but they're embedded into the local culture and area by this point.
Yep. So from there, in 1808, moving forward in our story, Craufurd sails to Corunna, Spain, to serve under Sir John Moore in the fight against Napoleon's armies that are now in Spain. Do you want to kind of walk us through that part of it?
Yeah, so this is where we get deeper into the Peninsular War itself now. So he lands in Corunna, which is where I mentioned in the first podcast, that's where Wellesley, later Wellington, lands and is waved away from. So it's in the northwest of Spain.
Correct.
And Sir John Moore has now taken over from Wellesley, having to come back after the Convention of Sintra. And he's moved as far down as Salamanca, way before the famous Battle of Salamanca, but it's the kind of dropping off point. This is where he receives his intelligence from Major Waters and realizes that he's about to be surrounded by both Soult's and kind of Napoleon's main force, actually, coming in. And they're going to, one of those forces actually facing him would have outdone him, outmatched him, really, but both would have just been
too much.
Too much. I would hasten to say it probably wouldn't even been a massacre. They would have almost had to surrender before both surrounded, or they would have just been forced into any sort of kind of prisoner situation. So they make this decision to head back towards the coast, Now, this is where Craufurd really steps up. He's put in brigade commands of the Light Brigade, as they are at the time, later the Light Division, and they form the rear guard, or part of the rear guard.
Right.
To give other units their due credit, there's certainly some famous Highlanders there.
Sure.
And this is the rear guard action, and there's beautiful paintings of this where they go forwards and backwards. When I say that is Craufurd actually marches ahead of the army at one point, and Moore recalls him, I think on Christmas Eve, to actually form the rear guard. And this is really important, that these men are formed up into the units and fight in the rear guard when we're in Spanish winter. I say we're basically Christmas Eve onto mid-January is this rear guard.
Yeah, and they've
limited deep snow.
Yeah, limited supplies, limited forage, and they're not up against some chump. I mean, Marshal Soult's one of the brightest that Napoleon has.
Marshal Soult is very capable.
Yeah,
he's really up there as being a great general. I think we've touched on him before. He's a looter,
yes,
and he's certainly got political aspirations as well.
Yeah,
but he manages to kind of get the jump on Moore, and certainly at this point, Soult is on top of his game. I would argue harshly against Moore here. On reflection, everyone kind of holds Moore as quite a hero.
Right.
I think he's kind of made massive mistakes during this campaign, and if he hadn't got intelligence from Major Waters, an exploring officer, he would have been captured.
Right.
I think if Moore had survived, he probably would have faced court-martial back in the UK. Wellington did after the Convention of Sintra and was exonerated. Now, it doesn't mean that Moore wouldn't have been exonerated for political reasons, but I think he certainly would have had to have faced serious questions about the decisions he made to go into Spain rather than staying into Portugal, the way that his Spanish allies, who, for reasons that we were just covering about things like the River Plate expedition, are very difficult to work with. But he does not manage it in the same way that Wellesley does.
Well, I'd like to really call out Craufurd's work on the rear guard here. And I think it's around this time that he gets his Black Bob nickname, correct?
I think this is basically where it's starting to come in. He does actually flog some of the men during this time. And it's, really difficult situations that they're in. He's keeping discipline kind of by the boot and the lash, as they say. And there's a bit of a thing, a bit of a misdemeanor amongst the 95th Rifles that, we weren't flogged or they weren't flogged. No, they were. They certainly were, like many of the other men. They were rebels when they were able to be, and would certainly steal a chicken from a farm here and there to feed themselves. But what Craufurd does is he holds them to a really, really high standard when the rest of the army is kind of like pack on, head down, trudge as much as they can. And it is a trudge across really difficult circumstances. I don't know if I mentioned this little anecdote before, but there is at least one or two ladies that I've read about who literally give birth by the side of the road, pick up the newborn baby and their husband's pack, because he's like broken. These are like 50-kilogram packs. They're not, though they look quite small, they've got the whole lives in them. Yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up, because that just shows like what a rush they were in. Like, why are there ladies along? Well, some of the officers brought their wives and that kind of thing. But
some of the men would have their wives by ballot. And these ladies are really, really tough and determined, and are massively helping their men folk out.
Yeah, and he was known for his ill temper and to be quick with the lashings, like you said, for, quote, willfulness and folly, end quote. So I assume, like, men, like you said, were out foraging without permission or stepping out of line when he's...
Almost certainly all the time.
Yeah.
But he manages to hold them together. They have rear guard actions. And if I can quickly mention that, it's hard to mention the retreat to Corunna without mentioning Thomas Plunkett.
Yes.
So this is a rifleman who shoots General Colbert. He does it in what they call the supine position. So that's lying back with the rifle up.
Your favorite?
Feet. Yeah, it's favorite one. It's my cover photo of me recreating it on Twitter for those who haven't seen it. And it's really stable. I can literally say that from experience. I haven't live fired it, but actually you can shoot like that really comfortably. Yeah. You can't do that with a modern assault rifle. I'm in the Army Reserves, and it's not something you can replicate. But it's a bit like having your own movable bipod. Yeah. He shoots Colbert, and then his aide, sometimes labelled a trumpeter, comes across. He shoots him as well. The distance is massively disputed. Some people have said 600 yards. That's probably not true. Some people have said it's like 150. The truth is probably in the middle, as always, about 300 yards, which is a good distance for a Baker rifle.
It was quite a rearguard defense. But oddly, his men, even though with the lashings and the temper and the violent language, they still liked him for his determination.
I think it's that kind of element of it's that respect.
Yeah.
You're respecting the fact that he's delivering a formed army into the field, and that's going to be really valued because the other option is to turn around and just trudge.
Yeah.
And then you've got French cavalry on your heels.
Yeah, and I read that, he yelled at officers and the men alike, which the officers probably didn't like because they're aristocracy as well.
Yes.
Yeah. But I also read that Wellington, when he took over the army, he only offered explanation and discussion to 3 generals, Hill, Beresford, and Black Bob. The other generals, he just said, here's your orders. I don't want to talk about it. So I thought that just shows the respect that this guy earned.
I think he's earning his respect in the retreat to Corunna, like very few others have.
Yep.
And we've touched on Beresford, and I'm a big fan of Hill. We did him last time, and I cannot think of 2 men that are much more different, though. That Craufurd, who's swearing and lashing people, Black Bob, he's got his nickname, and then Daddy Hill, because his men love him because he's calm, he's not a flogger, and don't get me wrong, I know where I'd like to be. I'd like to be with Hill not being lashed. However, there are different styles of leadership and command that both can have good end results.
Yeah, agreed. So obviously Corunna, the British escaped, but they come back in 1809, this time in Portugal with the future Duke of Wellington.
Yes.
And he was given command of the light division. I know that he had some command, like temporary command of it on the rear guard, which is composed of elite foot soldiers of the time. Can you give us a quick breakdown of both the light division? I know there's the King's German Legion and there's the Buffs. It seems like they're all elite. Are they? Is the light division really the elite division?
Yes, you open a can of worms. And whatever I say, I'm going to be damned if I do and damned if I don't. But yes, the light division had to receive additional training, which I think would mark them out as elite. If I have to decide, I would say yes, they are elite.
Okay.
I'm very fond of the Buffs, but they're not elite. They're line infantry. The differences become the light division, which was the light brigade and the retreats, and it's expanded out to division now. They receive additional training. The main units, which is the 43rd and the 52nd Light Infantry, supplemented with men of the 95th Rifles, are given additional training. Now, that's not actually as new as it sounds. There's men of the 5th, 60th Rifles, the Royal American Rifles, there's King's German Legion, and then each battalion has a light company. But what it's doing is forming them into a main body and taking their lessons that they've learned about skirmishing. We basically learned a load of lessons in the American Revolution, took them to a really high level with like the Rangers and things like that, and then kind of forgot the main lessons that had been learned in the intervening 50 or so years, and then kind of relearning them again, relearning them in the south of England, drilling them, and it drills down to having men that you trust below even NCO command. So when you've got the kind of the main line infantry, all of the orders are really being given by the captains, the lieutenants. They're being pushed into line by the sergeants. Skirmishing is different. It is being down into pairs or sections. So a section probably typically commanded by a corporal of about 10 men.
Right.
Who are then breaking down into pairs. And this is very much like modern military. It's pair fire maneuver. One of you is going to be lining up your shot and taking a shot at somebody, whilst the other one dashes forwards to the next bush, stone, bit of cover. And then they're taking turns to reload.
Yeah.
Obviously, it takes a lot longer to reload. But it's people who've got initiative. They can think on their feet. And that's what is pushing rather than kind of that drilled discipline.
Right.
Ironically, Black Bob Craufurd is one for the most discipline in the line. So he's forming these men who are very smart into kind of really rough diamonds. And I think that's where his nickname comes in. Their grudging respect for somebody who's taking them and they're being told, you're the new guys, you are the elite, and then forming them into something that's a really usable force rather than just going off and being some sort of special forces. They're not that at all. They're used as a large part of the army.
Right. And I think that just shows the Duke of Wellington's opinion of Black Bob if he gave him this special unit. take the command.
Yes, and he doesn't have that background. There's certainly lots of Germans in the army, in the British Army at the time, who have more experience with this kind of training and warfare. So I think there's something that Wellington Wellesley sees in him that takes him forwards. Partially, he's studied Prussian methods in Austria and Berlin. He's been out in India. He's been in Ireland. He's actually got and obviously South America. He's got quite good experience at this point.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something I want to touch on. He is a few years older than Wellington, Hill, Beresford, all these guys, yet he's a lower ranked general than all of those guys. Do you think there was some animosity there, or did that bother Craufurd, do you think?
I've not seen anything come up. He's 5 years older than Wellesley.
Yeah.
Well, that makes him 5 years older than Napoleon, for context.
Yep.
And some of those people have gone on. He's a general.
Mm-hmm.
He's a major general at this point. So kind of the lower rung of generalship.
Yeah.
Maybe he had resentment, but I think actually his anger comes from being an angry man rather than a full career. I don't think I would have seen him as somebody who's ever would have got the top job, and I don't see him as a political animal either. Not from what I've read, but that'd be interesting to know if there was something going on, kind of within layers, more subtle going down, that's motivating his famous temper.
Correct. Yeah. Well, I guess going back to our story, he's assigned in Portugal to guard almost like a 40-mile border of Portugal against the French and Spain, and he does quite well in that.
Yeah, this is where we're kind of the Light Division really come into themselves. The countryside's made for it in their defence. Earlier on in the campaign, there's a very little talked about unit called the Loyal Lusitanian Legion, which is a brigade of Portuguese with quite a few British officers who do a similar job, and they go up into the Portuguese mountains, and it's why Portugal's managed to stay independent from Spain so long. These mountain forts and little outcrops are very good, but the Light Division get into there, and they hold back the French for a long time until the Coa.
Yeah, the combat of Coa, 1810. He bumps into our hot-headed general, Marshal Ney, and he has a bit of a setback there. What happens in that engagement?
This is where it does go quite wrong. So Craufurd, for one reason or another, is almost literally caught napping. He's not giving out the command and control that is needed for his unit. Mm-hmm. And Ney comes in over the fort of Almeida, and kind of it sweeps around this beautiful Portuguese star fort. And they sweep around the side of it, and the Light Division initially fall back. And there's just not the orders from Craufurd that's needed. Ney's kind of forcing people forwards. Mm-hmm. We talked about them both earlier. It's really interesting that they actually kind of almost meet, certainly meet on the battlefield. Yeah, I see they've got quite similar styles. And Craufurd, as far as I can tell, basically stalls and starts to withdraw. Mm-hmm. Now, this is where actually the discipline and the training of the men really comes into effect. Mm-hmm. The Coa, it is just beautiful. This is like this ravine. They come tumbling down this ravine, and it's got one narrow medieval bridge across it. Mm-hmm. So what happens is a lot of the light infantry, I think mostly from the 43rd, turn around and perform a counterattack back up the slope they've just run down. Against the French, and force them back. At which point, the rest of the troops, which is largely the 95th and also some Portuguese like Cacadores, which are their light infantry, form back across this river. And when you go there, the river's a good couple of dozen meters wide, but it's so rocky you wouldn't be able to jump from rock to rock with hobnail boots on. It just would not be possible. Mm-hmm. So the only route's over this bridge. Craufurd's back with them there once they've turned back round, and they turn around and open fire across this bridge, and it's a real bottleneck. The 43rd managed to cross back, so you've got all of the Allies on one side and the French on a truck kind of size bridge. Modern haulage truck is about the width, right? And it's got low stone sides, and now all in the rocks slightly above you that you're running towards are riflemen and light infantry. And even light infantry, they are trained to fight at this kind of battle. They've actually got 2 sights on their musket. They shoot a different musket to the light infantry. I don't know if people realise. So they've got a front and a back marker on their musket, whereas normal muskets at the time just had a little front like kind of nub to kind of point in the rough direction.
Yeah.
And they are causing heavy casualties, and the French are not able to get over this bridge.
Yeah.
And when you see the bridge in real life, you can massively see why. And to kind of, if people want to know more, I think it's currently pinned to my Twitter page. I've got a load of videos, and one of them is me running across this bridge. I got really carried away. It's something you can really imagine why it was a really defensible point.
Yeah. And Marshall knows what you want to say about him. The guy was good at rear guard ambushes, and I think
yeah, definitely.
And I believe Wellington reprimanded Black Bob after this, though.
He gets reprimanded for this, and I think if it wasn't for A, his men who pull it out of the bag, and B, that bridge being there, if it had been just a big wide plain battlefield, they would have continued to kind of steamroll over them. This bridge, coupled with the men's training and determination and bravery, forces a victory there. I cannot tell you though, sadly, why this goes wrong for Black Bob personally. Right. It's not a heavy defeat for the British.
No,
it's a badly run rear guard.
Yeah,
but why is it badly run? Why does he not? Yeah,
it's a few hundred lost on each side, so it's not a huge like set piece battle, but it's still a setback for his,
definitely a setback.
Yeah, his career. So after that, it looks like he gets some R&R, and then almost like a champion coming out of the locker room to save like a battle. He comes back in 1811 at the Battle of Fuentes de Enoro. Can you describe this one to me?
Yeah. So you're seeing him emptying the ring with his Eye of a Tiger music here. Is that
like
what you've got?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So Rocky Balboa himself. Fuentes de Enoro. This is another one, just actually a walking distance from Coa and Almeida and Ciudad Rodrigo. It's between the two. And it's just inside the Spanish border. The Coa is just inside the Portuguese border. And there's a lot of these Portuguese battles take place in this kind of thorough stone in that area. It's fascinating countryside. And so this is to do with the siege of Almeida again, and the French trying to come back in to relieve that siege. And what happens is Wellington puts his, very strangely, his far right flank he puts out as Portuguese partisans, guerrillas, and then between them, the 7th Division. And there's a little bit of fighting in the town on the first day. The second day, not a lot of fighting happens. And on the third day, the French come widely round to the left, their left, the French right, past these partisans and catch the 7th Division, mostly by surprise. They've come up through dead grounds where they can't be seen. And the 7th Division, some of them kind of caught by surprise. And the Light Division are sent off to rescue them. So they kind of double across this flat plain. As they get close, they too are attacked by the French cavalry. They form into squares, so that's the rock, paper, scissors moment of the warfare. So they suddenly, the scissors are coming towards them, they're paper in line, and they suddenly form into a big tough ball, and that makes them a rock. And cavalries really can't break square, with very few notable exceptions. And so what they managed to do is that gives the 7th Division time to kind of march back. They are now assailed like rocks in an ocean with the French cavalry around them, and they are a little bit stranded. The Light Division actually move in square, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's like making a human pyramid and then going, right, now we're going to shuffle this to the side. And that is an amazing feat of action. It's not normal. It's not really trained. If you break down the tight shoulder to shoulder, like really pushing against your comrade, a horse will force its way through that, and you are just using your bayonet as barbed wire to keep them out.
And you make a great point. Squares weren't broken often, but once they were, that was it for the square. They were done.
You just need about 2 or 3 horses inside with cavalrymen on the back, and they will start to, because you're drilled in squares facing outwards, they can just rake along the back, just cutting down onto shoulders, necks, backs of heads.
Yep.
And once those people start to fall back, injured, if not dead, decapitated, then more horses will come in.
Yep.
And it's like opening a floodgate.
Yeah.
It happens most famously for the British and the Germans after Salamanca, where they break 3 squares on a single afternoon.
Yeah.
And that's really unheard of. And the first one happens because a horse actually dies at the last minute, slams through, and the King's German Legion Cavalry jump over and use that as a battering ram. It doesn't happen very often. It does happen in the Russian campaign for similar reasons. They kind of capture the wrong moment. But it's almost impossible. We see it at Waterloo. You see the Ney's famous cavalry charge, and how many squares are broken? None.
Right. Well, getting back to the Fuentes de Enoro, that's a loss for Marshal Massena. He eventually has to pull back, and I think Black Bob deservedly gets promoted. Correct? He
does. I mean, the Light Division's actions that day saved the 7th Division. Then Wellington, 7th Division, just so people realise the nickname, Wellington's Mongrels. They're a real ragtag. We've got the Black Brunswickers, we've got the Chasseurs Britanniques. I think we've got the 68th Durham Light Infantry in there. But they're a real ragtag bunch. They're basically the new division that just been formed.
That's interesting.
They could have been wiped out.
Yeah, that's an interesting nickname right there. Moving on in our story, in 1812, we get into the siege of Ciudad Rodrigo, and our friend Zach White just wrote a book, which I thought was interesting, which is about sieges, or edited a book, I should say. Can you talk to us about, we're talking about battlefields here. Why were sieges so important?
So sieges, especially Ciudad Rodrigo and Badajoz, they need to be done. And here, especially Ciudad and Badajoz, but arguably Almeida as well on the Portuguese side, they are the keys to Spain. They are blocking the roads that leads out of the mountains into the flat Spanish countryside. And it is, we drive over it and it's steep out of these, and you suddenly goes flat. And you can't bypass these forts with their cannon, at every angle. They're also the supply route in, so where they need to be taken. That's where it comes from.
Right.
And Ciudad Rodrigo is the first of these two.
And you can't just leave 8,000 enemy soldiers in your rear as you move forward. You got to take care of that fort before moving forward.
Yes, it needs to be done. And people joke about me being really in the church of Napoleon and Wellington, and I'll be on the Wellington side. Well, actually, I will always hold my hand up, and he massively has got flaws from being a snob, for not doing political reform, but also he is not very good at sieges. However, Ciudad Rodrigo, arguably, it's only a 2-week siege. It does actually do quite well.
Yeah, and we're talking at a time when sieges like Genoa or some of these other ones that took months, Danzig, that took months. So
and Badajoz, which is later, it's a harder nut to crack, but it takes a lot longer. And when the troops arrive at Ciudad Rodrigo, go and storm a redoubt. So that's like an outlying fort meant to slow down the British. The French had actually hoped that was going to last for 2 weeks. It gets stormed overnight. The Light Division kind of come in and sweep it aside, storm in there, bayonets, muskets, some short ladders, and get into the redoubt. So that's the first victory there at Ciudad for Craufurd's Light Division.
Okay. Well, everything's going well, but tragedy strikes. What happens to our protagonist?
It goes really well. The breaches are made within 2 weeks. So the holes are made in the walls of the city.
Right.
And this is normally the moment that you'd expect that the city would surrender. It's pretty much going to go one way now, guys. There's thousands of us outside, 2,000 inside, but like 10,000 plus outside with lots of reinforcements and reserves. And the Allies form up, and the French reinforce, but it's going to be tooth and nail action. Yeah. The main breach. The greater breach, as it's known, is going to be stormed, but there's also one just down the line, and that's given to the Light Division, known as the lesser breach. And this is where Craufurd actually is literally leading them, kind of like sword and hat in hand, and they're going up. So the breach itself will be all the rubble that's come out of the wall, the stone itself, and then the inside of the wall itself will be loosely packed stones, and that's all going to be spilling down, and the men will be charging up that. And Craufurd's seen standing there kind of willing them on, shouting at them. You know, his nickname to his Black Bob, and he's shouting at them to get up, but he's hit. He's not instantly killed, but it's a mortal wound in this action, and this is where he's going to be meeting his end.
Yeah, I saw like you said, it wasn't an initial, like he wasn't like shot in the head and killed instantly. I think it went like over his lung and into his spine, and I believe he laid in pain for 4 days before passing.
It's 4 days. One of his staff officers, Lieutenant Shaw, the 43rd, takes him off, and then he's got 4 days, and apparently really painful death, really, like kind of lingering there. I think it goes through his side, and he's got it in his back, and he takes a long time to die from that. They actually decided here to bury him within that breach, and there's a memorial today, 2 plaques, one at the time and one as an anniversary.
Yeah.
And it's kind of leads to one of my favorite anecdotes. You know, you can tell a lot about somebody when they're gone. Well, there was the funeral itself. He was borne by sergeant majors of various regiments of the Light Division. And when this comes out, what I'll do is I'll share a few of my favorite portraits and paintings of Black Bob Craufurd.
Okay.
But there's the famous one of him directing the troops, but the other, probably my favorite one by Krista Hook, is his funeral. And they all stood there, and the sergeant majors in their coats, like great coats with a sash over the top, are kind of bearing the coffin down into the breach. Afterwards, one of the things that he would apparently shout or even flog people for was avoiding puddles. So you want to see people marching on the road to be in a straight line, not stepping round and going around. So apparently afterwards, as they marched away, the Light Division all found a puddle and marched through it as their kind of tribute to Black Bob Craufurd.
That's great.
So that's just kind of that kind of, you know, it's an unpleasant thing to get wet socks, to put yourself into discomfort. And it was something that they knew that he, hated them doing. So he decided to march through it.
That's amazing. I've never heard that story.
It's a touching tribute. You know, it's like raising a glass to somebody. Yeah.
Now, obviously, Wellington was distraught. What do you think his legacy was overall, Black Bob?
I would say it's probably linked directly to the Light Division. He's taken them from their famous rear guard and seen them through that. Through Fuentes is probably, I would say, that one of the biggest victories of the Peninsular War is an individual action. People can argue all sorts of things. Ironically, the one they're known for is Salamanca, and actually they're on the outskirts of the fighting and have much less of a role than they do at Fuentes. Overseeing that, and Ciudad Rodrigo itself, as I said, he took them in there, not only in the main kind of storming, but very early on made it to a very short siege and solidified that reputation. The Light Division today are really kind of synonymous with the Peninsular War and fame and victory. And he oversaw that kind of mid to early stage that became so important to put them together. The Light Division grew from a brigade and grew out, but people can name him as the principal commander of that unit, and those kind of principles that we take in as doctrine are kind of usual today for fighting. And he helped, the doctrine had already been written, but he helped prove that those men and that kind of style was successful. So there's a military strategy element to his legacy, as well as, of course, his nickname, Black Bob Craufurd. You don't know many British commanders by nicknames the same element as him.
And I think there's the aspect of, he was a strict disciplinarian. He flogged people, as you mentioned, but it was kind of the lesser of two evils. By having the strict discipline and maybe penalizing 2 or 3 soldiers, he was saving the lot, right? He was saving the big group with his discipline. And
that's where it comes from. It's for the greater good. If you fight as one unit, we talked earlier about the squares. That is strict discipline. You've got to have the faith in the guys either side of you, but also you've got to not turn tail and run and try to save yourself. And that's where it comes down to. The discipline is needed. The way he decided to go about it is controversial, but the end result was, top of the league troops, really, that delivered victory. And ultimately, the soldiers are there to deliver victory, and he's saving lives by doing that.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I learned a heck of a lot in that episode. It was really, really good, and I appreciate you enlightening us on Black Bob Craufurd. And yeah, Marcus, thank you.
You're very welcome. So when this comes out, I'll share some pictures, get people interested. And if you want to really dive down more into him, Ian Fletcher wrote a book, Robert Craufurd, The Man and the Myth. And I think that's online for like £25 sterling. So well worth getting. It's huge. I've got it in front of me now. It's like 600 pages. It's a big weighty book. But there's a lot more information there on him.
Fabulous. Okay, we'll check that out on Amazon or wherever you buy books. Yeah, but thanks again, and this was great.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.